Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Bryan Lanza, former Deputy Communications Director for the Trump administration team. You're with Mercury now. You worked on the transition team. Just for street cred, I remember meeting Lanza in 2015, 2016, and
Yeah.
nobody believed in the president, and you were totally on board. A lot of things that I think a lot of people didn't see. So I always trust your political instincts, and I'm always excited to get a chance to pick your brain about stuff. So
Thank you.
let's get going on some Electoral College math. What are the must-win states for the president?
What are the must-wins? Obviously, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Those are the ones that are going to be critical in the linchpin to his reelection.
Yeah, and as we're looking at some of those, I mean, our numbers are showing that they're leaning more Dem. What are you guys seeing? What are you sort of thinking about that state?
Yeah, listen, it's July. I think voters are going to start paying attention at the end of Labor Day, like they usually do. I think those numbers are, it's not really set. What the set of issues are going to be discussed in November, and it's going to matter to the voters. I think COVID has a tremendous amount of people's attention. But what we've seen sort of a diminishing attention span on that, and you see more and more issues starting to break through. But I tell everybody, if we're having a COVID discussion in October, the president's chances of winning become exponentially harder. But if we go into the fall and have conversations about the economy, conversations about who's best prepared to handle the threat of China, I think it becomes pretty clear that the president will win re-election.
Yeah, and you see the president today down in Georgia at UPS having a conversation about deregulating transportation projects. So certainly trying to set the tone away from COVID.
Yes.
So I find Ohio particularly interesting. I think it used to be this really reliable bellwether state and has swung far more Republican through the last 4-6 years. What's going on in Ohio? What are your instincts on that?
Listen, I think Ohio is a reflection of, they had 8 years of President Obama, and they rejected Democratic Party rule there. They just didn't see those policies beneficial toward them. And when you look at the economy in Ohio and some of the areas and the communities that have been left behind, it is sort of tailored more toward the President Trump and his coalition. Couple that with the 8 years of Obama, it's sort of hard for a Democrat to have any inroads there, especially when you look at the Democratic policies of the Biden-Obama, tenure. They targeted Ohio pretty tough, and more importantly, there's a lot of communities that have been left behind as a result of these free trade agreements. That, for the first time ever, we had a Republican president, not making the Wall Street pitch of free trade being good for everybody, but making the pitch that fair trade is needed because we need to protect and preserve some of these communities that have been left behind. That was a different message for a Republican. You have Romney, you have McCain, those sort of more Wall Street candidates who talked about globalization, who talked about trade, and saw the nuisance and felt a nuisance talking about these communities left behind. And I think President Trump has sort of morphed into this populist candidate that he addresses those communities, and he has a strong connection with it. And that's different from the Obama era, and certainly different than the Bush era.
Well, I remember being in Ohio in 2016, and we were talking to a group of union guys, and they were saying, the union leaders were saying, vote for Hillary, but they were all Sanders guys, and I imagine that a lot of those guys then flipped over to Trump as well. So there's a bit of that interesting political phenomenon that we've seen in different places across the country. Otherwise, wouldn't make any sense, but given different points of policy, really does make sense.
Well, it's a different Republican Party with Trump there. I mean, he, like I said, you had the corporate side with Romney, with McCain, and with Bush, who sort of viewed it as a trickle-down approach, the Reagan model. And I think Trump, being a Democrat the majority of his life, and being able to relate to these communities, he's the billionaire that relates to these communities. He's just different, he's changed the Republican Party. I think if you look at this response to COVID and the economic packages that came out, you're seeing a president that put a lot of money and a lot of investment into small businesses. Whereas, previous Republican presidents would just say, hey, let's cut taxes at the top and let's hope that the trickle effect, hits these communities. I think President Trump is the different Republican that says, no, 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 I'm going to focus on these communities, which is different than Bush, than Romney, than McCain. And that's why you have this special or unique relationship, with Trump, and these sort of rural, rural states.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're looking at the Rust Belt states, speaking of this sort of constituency, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, they delivered largely that victory, to President Trump. The numbers and predicted in other polling don't look great for him. What does he have to do to win those states?
Yeah, listen, I think he's got to get back to an economic conversation. And at the end of the day, those states, when they voted for Trump, they voted for something different. And, they're not voting for the traditional Republican president. And I think, when the president can get back onto the footing of talking about the economy, of talking about these communities left behind, and, doing that in contrast to Joe Biden, who supported all these free trade agreements, or these fair trade agreements, or free trade agreements that have displaced a significant amount of the population in these states, whether it's Wisconsin or Michigan. There's a contrast. I know Biden came out this week and he talked about his economic package. I just don't think it's going to sell. He has a record of 44 years in office of shipping jobs to China, of supporting these trade agreements that have ravaged, some of these communities. And it's kind of hard to come in year 45 and say, hey, I'm different now, and I'm going to do these proposals. I just don't think it's believable. And I think the more and more we have this conversation, about what the economy looks like post-COVID, I think, Biden's going to have a very, very, tough hill to climb, because these communities were left behind, and they were left behind during his tenure, as a U.S. Senator and as Vice President. And it's just hard to believe that after 44 years, that he can just come up with a new policy and the American people are going to believe it. When you look at the record, and it's just demonstrably bad to these states, it's a tough sell. But like I said, if it's a COVID conversation, the chances of Biden presidency increase. If it's an economic conversation, I think you're going to see a landslide, truth be told.
Yeah. And do you think the same thing goes for Florida? We're obviously seeing different shakier numbers there. Does the economic conversation hit Florida, or because of the population makeup, do you have to do something different there?
No, I think if you look at Florida, specifically the Hispanic community, and what what took place during the Trump era, and this huge growth of small businesses, those growth of small businesses took place in these minority communities. And I think that's what appeals to to Latinos, Floridans, and to President Trump, is that focus on those small businesses, understanding that they are the backbone of this economy. Very similar to President Bill Clinton. I was a Democrat during the Clinton-Gore era, and the focus on the small businesses, and the record that he attained during small businesses, it was the backbone of his economic success story. And in the first 3 years of President Trump, you see that focus, that opened up our small business economy at records we had never seen before. And I think that's what, when you're looking at Florida, that's why the economic message, works so well, because of the small business growth that took place there. And nobody believes Biden's going to offer anything to small businesses. I mean, they really didn't offer much during the Obama era. So, what's different now?
And then finally, moving on to Arizona, our market in Arizona. It's been trending also solidly Democratic. Polling seems to be a little wonky. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at the Real Clear Politics polls, but some are tied. And so how do you see that breaking? I mean, it seems like some of that trend toward a tightening might be happening there, but we'll see where that goes.
I think part of it is, the president has struggled with some of the suburban women. I think we've known that. And if you look at Arizona, that's where you probably see the biggest impact. It's not this Latino surge that everybody's talking about. It's the suburban women that have sort of, grown a little bit frustrated over the last couple of years at the messaging out of this administration and some of the tactics that they've used. But I think, when they're forced to make a decision, what's in their best interest, I think you'll see a lot of them come back. I think last time you saw President, you saw Martha McSally lose, or ultimately lose. There was a tough campaign, but you had a unique candidate, in Senator Sinema, who had that bipartisan appeal, and you didn't necessarily have the issues, have real, substantive issue debate at that time. I think McSally now is probably going to have a more substantive debate against, Kelly, and you'll see people sort of swing back because it is scary, what the Democrats propose in their vision for this country. I think you just saw it, today earlier this week, in Biden's policy for, excuse me for that noise, in Biden's policy for, housing in the suburbs. I mean, he basically wants to disband the suburbs and create, hundreds of little micro cities outside to deal with that. That's not what Arizona wants. And he's going to have a tough sell. I know, the media hasn't covered it much of his housing policy, but his housing policy literally will disband the suburbs. And I don't think anybody, in the suburbs wants that. You leave the cities for a reason. I mean, people are leaving New York. I saw just last month, 500,000 people left New York, not because things were great, the city of New York, not because things were great, because things were rather shitty. And you're going to see, try making that sell to the suburbs that you want to make, thousands of mini New Yorks in Arizona. It's just not going to sell.
Fair enough. So if you were running the campaign right now, what would be your next step? We saw the president in the Rose Garden. We saw him in Georgia. We saw the op-ed from his campaign manager, sort of setting the stage. Very bluntly setting the stage for how they were going to go after Biden and how they saw the campaign going. What's your aim at this stage of the campaign if you were in those shoes?
Yeah, listen, he's got a record. Joe Biden's record as senator sucks. His record as VP is atrocious. And so if I'm running against Joe Biden, I run directly against a record. Now, yes, he's lost 3 steps. He's probably 3 beers short of a 6-pack, in his mental capacity. I think we see that every day. We just saw that yesterday when he refused to answer questions. We know why he doesn't want to answer questions, whereas you have President Trump, who's probably the most transparent president in giving the media access. And I think that's just, if I'm running the campaign, I focus on who Joe Biden was as a senator and who he was as a VP. And I think that's a stark contrast to what the country wants, post-COVID, as we're looking at this economic recovery. Let's not forget the Biden-Obama presidency had a chance of an economic recovery, and we saw the slowest growth economic recovery in American history. That's not what the people want coming out of COVID. They want to be able to bounce back. They want their jobs back. They want, their lives returned back to normal. And when you look at the record of Biden, normal means less jobs, less income, means multiple people working, means people working, 4 to 5, 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet. I don't think they want that. And we will have that vigorous debate, as the issues get closer and as we start to focus on him more.
So you mentioned 3 beers short of a 6-pack. We've seen this sort of positioning about the former vice president's mental acuity. Do you think that's really what people want to hear right now?
Well, I think people want to know that their president has the capacity to execute things, and when you see that he can't even execute interviews, I think that raises a question. Is this what we want? In our presidency? I'm not saying we had an Adlai Stevenson situation where he's acknowledging that he had electroshock therapy at one point in his past, but I think you can sort of look at that and say, the guy is clearly short somewhere, and at the end of the day, they've got to make the decision. Does a diminished mental capacity outweigh, a second term of a President Trump? And I think as you get closer, people are going to get scared of that. And people want to make sure, and they want to know that their presidents have the full capacity to deal with the threats that exist. And China's a serious threat. And, you can't have a president that's, solely reliant on aides to move the message. A president leads, a president sets an example, and they set a tone. And it's kind of hard to lead and set a tone when the guy can't even complete sentences. So
along that lines, we have a person asking this question. How come when Julian Castro and other people tried that tactic, it backfired? Why try it again?
Well, listen, I think Democratic politics are weak, and they don't like the criticism of those types of attacks. I think you looked at a race where, people got criticized for having sharp elbows. Mm-hmm. Let there be no mistake. There are going to be sharp elbows thrown in this campaign on the final 90 days, and we're not gonna take the soft approach. I mean, there's a lot of things at stake here, and Democrats just like to play nice in their primaries. It was far different than when Hillary ran against Obama, where there were some really sharp elbows there thrown, and Biden didn't fare so well when those sharp elbows were thrown in '08. And, he sort of benefited from the fact that this election cycle that, the Democrats, for some reason, I still don't understand why, were afraid to punch each other pretty hard. I think when you saw the initial punch of Kamala Harris against Joe Biden, you saw some oxygen there, you saw some space, and then she ultimately backed down from that. So I think that tells you that, the Democratic primary, they just, for whatever reason, they just didn't want to engage in the sharp elbows that we've become to known as American politics.
So what I'm getting from you is wait till September, and that's when the real campaign begins.
What you're getting from me is wait till the voters start paying attention. I think we
Okay.
both know in the summer they don't pay attention. They're focused on their commutes. They're focused on what they're going to make for dinner. They're focused on their vacations. But when we know that when presidential politics comes into play after Labor Day, when the attention starts to expand, right now you probably have 10% that are paying hyper attention, and that number grows significantly after Labor Day. And that's when elections matter. That's when elections are won and lost, is in that final run when voters are paying the most attention because their lives, no matter how busy they are, they now have to focus on an election. Whereas, I think right now voters are distracted on, how are they what vacations they're gonna take, what they're making for dinner.
Fair enough. So we saw Jeff Sessions go down in Alabama yesterday.
Correct.
What does that win?
Sad day.
For
Very sad.
What does that win for the White House mean for other candidates in 2020?
Listen, I think what it means to other candidates is that if you're going to have the president's endorsement, you better run a good campaign. The president's endorsement's not enough to get you across the finish line, but it's enough to get you a significant amount of attention. And the smart campaigns who receive the president's endorsements, who run the strong campaigns, ultimately win. You've had, the president endorse some candidates who didn't win, but I think when you ultimately look at those campaigns, they were very weak run campaigns. And the president endorsement mattered. It brought people a lot of attention, but it's not the singular issue that's going to help a candidate. You still have to run a strong campaign, and you saw some people run strong campaigns, specifically in Alabama. They ran a very smart, strong campaign and utilized the president's endorsement in the right way. There are other campaigns, specifically in North Carolina, that had president's endorsement, and they utilized it poorly.
Fair enough. So the president, Dr. Fauci, I'd like to change subjects a little bit.
Anthony, as the president likes to call him.
What's that?
Anthony, as the president likes to call him.
I'm gonna stick with Dr. Fauci because I'm into titles. But seem to walk this high wire act with their relationship. Do you think that Fauci is able to stay on through the end of the election? Obviously, we've seen the Peter Navarro op-ed. What do you make of the way that that's going?
Listen, I think Dr. Fauci made some critical mistakes early on. And if he continues to make those mistakes, I think the American public are going to want him out directly. I think we have to be cognizant of that. I mean, I don't think it's opposition research to talk about the mistakes that he made early on. Let's remember that he didn't talk about, human-to-human transmission until early March. That was well after the president had shut down, travel to China. He's on record saying that masks, didn't help in this situation, and voters shouldn't buy, and people shouldn't buy masks, necessarily voters. And I think those issues, if he were a general in the field, he'd probably be relieved of his duty for underestimating the enemy. And the enemy is COVID, let's be clear. But I think, Fauci, if he continues to make these critical errors that he's made in the past, I think the American public, they're not going to want him there. They're going to want somebody who knows what's going on, who's not speaking who's not just believing everything that's coming from, other doctors. I mean, you need evidence, you need data to support some of these things. And we knew, we had the feeling that in February there was human-to-human transition, and you still had Dr. Fauci say that, what he's hearing from China and what he's hearing from the WTO, that there's no human-to-human transmission. Those are critical error, and ultimately proved to be a fatal error for nearly 136,000 Americans. And so when you look at that, you have to say, how many more chances does this guy get to make mistakes that are going to lead to the death of Americans? I think we have to look at it honestly and say, you know what, he shouldn't be allowed any more mistakes, and we'll see where it lies. But we're talking about a guy who's committed grave errors, and those grave errors have resulted in the deaths of thousands of Americans.
Sounds a little bit like Fauci could become the person who's responsible for this. Is that sort of the positioning that people are taking?
Yeah, listen, I'm not here to say who's responsible. I mean, the president at the end of the day is ultimately responsible for the COVID response, and he takes his, he listens to his advisors, he listens to scientists, And some scientists prove to be right and some scientists prove to be wrong. But if you're looking at the facts, how do you ignore these two critical mistakes? Fauci will do what he's going to do, and he's going to make the comments that he's going to make. But he's got to step up his game and actually be more accurate in the process and not continue to commit these fatal errors.
Fair enough. So let's shift gears a little bit away from all the crazy politics. So I love talking about, there you go. You need another beer.
Let's do it. I know.
It's hot out there.
It is hot.
So I always love talking about these. There you go. I hope other people are ordering other beers. So I love talking about the down ballot races. So we're going to do a lightning round with these markets. I think that our folks enjoy that. So can you tell us what price you would buy Dem or Republican at? And we'll start with California 25. Bryan's got tons of experience in California, grew up in California politics. So in the craziness of California politics, and you're obviously a Republican there, what do you see? What do you see what's going on here? What would you buy, and what price would you buy and sell at?
I mean, I got to tell you, I'd buy the Democrat, just because of turnout and what California is doing. I think the 61 cents is a good price. If I'm going to buy on the Republican, I think it's overpriced right now. I don't see the math there for the incumbent. That said, there is a history of, when you have special elections, and somebody wins those special elections, that candidate, whether it's he or she, usually wins that next election because the voters aren't willing to, voters want to give these candidates a little bit more time. That said, or these elected officials more time. That said, we live in a hyper-partisan environment, and California is of those places. And, the reason I get my money on the Democrat is you're going to have a tremendous amount of money that's spent in California on the Democratic side that the Republicans just won't invest in. LA's, thank you very much, is one of the largest media markets, in the country. And last time I checked it, I think it's about $1.5 million a week to spend on broadcast, and it's exponentially inefficient. But it's going to be a money. Anytime it's in the LA media market in California, the Democrats have always had the ability to outspend Republicans. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'll see any difference now. And like I said, if I'm betting today, I'm betting against history, and I believe that the Democrat will ultimately win that race.
What's going on in Orange County? You want to talk a little bit about Orange County politics?
Sure. What do you want to talk about? The seats there, or
just a couple of the seats and like the general overview.
Yeah, I mean, it's listen, it's a tough road for Republicans in California right now. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I left California in 2013. I probably stayed there an extra 5 years longer than I should have, because Republicans were a dying breed there. They have yet to figure out, how to adapt their message. I believe in the free market of ideas, and I can wholeheartedly say that the Republican Party in California, those candidates have failed at the free market of ideas, and that's a problem. They're stuck on issues that aren't sort of relevant to the voters. They're they're not able to raise the money they need to raise. So if I'm looking at Orange County, at least on the congressional side, I'd probably put my money on the Democrats right now. Unless there's this new issue that emerges. And by the way, California is, it can change quickly. I think we've seen, COVID just has sort of this response to some people, and California's they're about to close. I think they just closed again, some of their bars, which would suck here. But I think, the voters at some point, they're going to blame somebody for that. I don't think you can blame Trump. President Trump for the failures of California. It's a democratically run statewide. The cities that are taking the biggest beating, for the most part, we're democratic run cities. And there's a lot of dishonesty, in my opinion, is taking place. I mean, we know what the surge is in California. You just don't hear about it. There was these protests that took place. I mean, the data shows that the surge is taking place in some of these protests, and you don't see the coverage. That just goes to show you that the advantage that the Democrats have, because the media is sort of complicit in covering up, the real failures that have been taking place in California. And I mean, the protests were a direct result of these surges, and you have yet anybody to criticize these protests. And now you're punishing business owners and telling them to close their shops again. I think, at some point, the voter, Tom McClintock, who was a congressman there, he always said that, at some point there's just going to be too much that the Democrats put on the boat that ultimately sinks them. It's not going to be anything the Republicans do to get it back. And I think that at the end of the day, he might be right in this, that there might be a little bit too much that the Democrats are allowing to be put on the boat with respect to COVID, and you'll see, probably, hopefully, in my opinion, a revolt in California and have more balanced elections. California's it's out there. It's been out there for a long time.
When you start to see that happening, will you let me know, and then we'll talk?
Sure.
We'll talk about when there's on the vote. So let's talk about Alaska, the Senate race there. We chatted.
It's ours.
We chatted with James Carville a little bit about this race. He said he saw some value here. What price would you buy Dem or Republican at?
Go back down. I think 27 cents is probably a good investment on the Dem side, because at the end of the day, they're not going to win. I just don't see it. Carville's been wrong more times than he's right. I think he's been forced to eat his shoe on national television when he made some political predictions. I think he was on your old network that he made some political predictions.
We're all friends here.
No, I know. I'm just pointing out the facts. Facts aren't partisan. They're just facts.
Okay.
I don't think, I think, the 27 cents is probably too high, but anytime you're in the low 20s, it's easy money to take that bet, and hopefully it strikes. It's just like going to the horse races. Somebody's going to get it, and sometimes somebody guesses right. I don't, for anybody to think that a Democrat has a strong chance of winning in Alaska is just ultimately going to be a guess, because the data doesn't support it, the facts don't support it, the issues don't support it. But you never know what COVID does.
I always bet on the horse with the coolest name. So,
Yeah, there you go.
I'm one of those. So let's talk about where I live, Montana. The state has had some attention from the Trump campaign and family in the past.
Yeah.
Most recently, Don Jr. was here, attended a fundraiser at the Yellowstone Club. Do you see Daines keeping his state, or will Bullock win? What price would you buy Daines at? What price is he?
I think the pricing for Gaines.
At?
I think the price is probably right for Gaines. I think his challenge is the third-party candidate that's in there. The Libertarian candidate. They end up garnering about, close to 5 to 7% in most elections. If that didn't exist, I think Gaines is the best, or Daines is the best bet. But I think that that Libertarian candidate's going to pull enough votes away, similar to what you saw with Denny Rayburg in Montana, that just the circumstances are what they are. Is the sort of conservative Republican Libertarian vote there is going to be split, and that's how ultimately Democrats always win that race. They don't win it when it's head to head. They win it when they get a third party in there to suck up Republican votes, and there's just not a strong enough Green Party in there to suck away votes from the Democratic side.
Okay, North Carolina. You mentioned North Carolina Senate race a little bit ago.
We're screwed.
We chatted with Doug Hyatt a little bit back. Obviously, one of the most hotly contested races, could be a bellwether that Ohio used to be the state in both the electoral and the Senate, but you say you're screwed.
It's been in my opinion, it hasn't necessarily hit the highlights I want for an incumbent. You see the advantages incumbents always have, and this incumbent has surrendered a lot of those advantages. I think COVID right now is ravaging the state, and President Trump so closely aligned to the COVID response in North Carolina that it's been overwhelmingly negative right now. And in my opinion, and I may upset some of my friends, I just don't think the campaign on the Republican side has sort of inspired the enthusiasm that you need that an incumbent should have at this particular point. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I get a text message from some of my friends saying, "What the hell are you talking about? You got to talk the party line." That may be the case. Wouldn't be the first time, but in my opinion, I think it's if I'm the incumbent and I'm the donor to that incumbent, I'm saying, how did you surrender your strategic advantage that incumbents have? Now, it's not late. Like I said, it's still early. Some late issues could emerge. I'm not going to sort of tip my hat, but I know there's a lot of, there's been some testing, some polling to inject some late issues into that race that are sort of create offense for Republicans. I think that potential is still there. But if the election were held today, I think you have to look at the campaign and say, they squandered the incumbent opportunity.
Does that impact the Electoral College then, do you think?
No, listen, I think at the end of the day, Trump wins, North Carolina. It'll be close, but I do think he wins it. So it wouldn't impact the Electoral College, but it certainly impact losing a Senate seat.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Trump has to win big in North Carolina for Tillis to get across the finish line.
I mean, different states, but similar kind of numbers. You look at Michigan, obviously, you've got
you've got a Senate race there. It's hotly contested, and then also the numbers that are showing, you know, in the Electoral College within our numbers. Do you see that? Which way do you see Michigan breaking?
I think Michigan's a little bit different. You have a challenger who's actually running a very good campaign. He's outraised his opponent. I think the last quarter, you know, he's probably better connected in Michigan than we've had previous candidates. You know, he's an African American. He's a decorated war veteran. I think that helps him in Michigan. And I think specifically, if you look at the message that the president has in Michigan, resonates more than it would resonate in North Carolina. Sort of these communities been ripped apart because of free trade. You know, the president sort of found he was able to line up a needle there and thread something, and I think the potential's there. Is you just, you know, when you're a challenger, you've got to run an error-free game, and I think so far James and his crew have run error-free. They could use some help, and they may get some help. You know, Michigan's a state that allows ballot initiatives, and there's ballot initiatives there that can help, that are wedge issues that help Republicans there. So I feel a little bit more bullish in Michigan, you know, picking up the Senate seat than us holding up the Senate seat in North Carolina.
And you feel the same way about the Electoral College, bullish in Michigan?
Yeah, I think so. I think the president's message is better suited for a Michigan, Wisconsin, even Minnesota. I think Minnesota will ultimately turn red as well this cycle.
Do you?
I think.
Absolutely. What are you hearing there that makes you think that?
I think there's been a full-on rejection of Democratic politics in Minnesota. If you look at the last 3 months that have taken place there, people want to blame Republicans for it, but it's been Democratic Party, one-party rule for a very long time. And when you look at that, there's they haven't done anything to improve the situation. And then this threat of we're going to defund the police. You know, when you're looking at crime increasing in big cities like Los Angeles and New York, by 200 to 300%, and you have that message of disbanding the police, that scares suburban people. That scares, and then they're talking about disbanding the suburbs. I think that puts Minnesota, who has seen a tremendous amount of violence as a response to the murder of George Floyd, and then the response from the government shows the Democratic government has been nothing but weakness. I think that scares suburban voters and suburban moms who ultimately care about security for the family, security, economic security. And there's been nothing that the Minnesota voter has seen of anything strength or security coming from the Democratic Party. And now you're having President Trump saying we may have to come into these cities and try to straighten them out because of the weakness of these Democratic mayors. I mean, the mayor of Minneapolis. I mean, I've never seen anybody more weaker in my life. He abandoned, police precinct that allowed this violence to escalate to a level we'd never seen. That is a direct failure of Democratic policies, and I think voters will ultimately reject that primarily because they're scared that what's happening in the cities will transcend in the suburbs.
So let's move on to Kansas. Is there any price where you would buy Dem in Kansas? I mean, 26 now. I mean, do you see there's kind of the Iowa, Kansas kind of interesting?
I don't see it. I think 26 is high. I just don't see Kansas. The Democratic candidate is completely uninspiring. They really haven't done much, from that. I think Republicans, I think that states, you had Sebelius, who was an outlier before when she ran early on, but I think they haven't put a good candidate. I think 26 is rather high. 26 cents is rather high. I mean, if I'm betting money, I look at the Democratic candidate, and I probably wouldn't put more than 15 cents at it. But I mean, people like to talk about Kansas as a potential swing state and talk about all of these things. But at the end of the day, you still have to field strong candidates, and the Democrats have fielded a weak candidate.
Are there any markets where you see value, somewhere you think that it's totally mispriced? Anything that you would do? Have you had a chance to look at any of that stuff?
I see Arizona. Like I said, we talk Arizona. I see Arizona. I would say Colorado. I pay attention to what the White House is going to do with respect to cannabis, medical cannabis to be specific. I think if you look at what's come out of this unity coalition meeting between the Bidens and the Bernie Sanders, and Biden taking this position where he doesn't believe in any type of legalization, that has let out a lot of enthusiasm there for Democrats who believe that it's their turn. And let's be honest, they don't want to wait. They expect the Democrats to toe the party line in legalization. We've seen that in the polling, and Biden taking this position that we're not there yet. I mean, I think that's going to do a tremendous amount to suppress the enthusiasm in some of the votes there. And then you look at the Senate candidate who's just run a god-awful campaign. You know, he's been fined for ethics. I think Colorado is a ripe state where, you know, if you're looking, you know, if you're a voter and you're turned off by, by the governor's former governor's activities, and you're turned off, and you're a Democrat, and you're turned off by, these college campuses, and you're turned off by, Biden taking the safe, the normal, conservative approach on cannabis. I think that leads to the depressed turnout on the Democratic side, irrespective of how much, these people, may hate Trump. At the end of the day, they shifted because of enthusiasm towards a candidate. They didn't become blue because they hated Pete Coors or because they hated George W. Bush. It became blue because Democrats put a lot of strong candidates forward, and they're able to thread the needle. And I think this one becomes, probably the weakest candidate they have at a weak time, and they're hitting the wrong issue.
To that point, you talk about sort of enthusiasm, right? What are the must-win constituencies for Republicans, and what are the must-win constituencies for Democrats in the presidential?
Yeah, listen, I think for Republicans in the presidential, we've got to find the right message thread to bring back. I don't even think you need to bring back these suburban voters. I mean, I think if you look at the Biden coalition, he's probably sitting on a high number of Republicans because they're turned off by the president. But at the end of the day, I've always told the campaign, I said, the easiest way to get these voters back is remind them that the coalition that they're sitting in. You have these Republican voters with their St. John's knit outfits, with their white pearls, and they're sitting across the bar, with Black Lives Matters, Antifa. That makes Republicans uncomfortable. So I always said, the quickest way to get that coalition back is just remind them, these voters back, is just remind them of the coalition they're choosing to be a part of and that agenda. And that's not what suburban women, suburban Republican women want. They want security, they want safety, they don't want this radicalization to take place in their suburbs. So I think, we have the opportunity to get those suburban women back, or for them to stay on the sidelines. I mean, Biden can't win without these suburban women vote. We won last time necessarily with a smaller gap than we're used to. But at the end of the day, they're critical to Biden's coalition. And if the Republicans do a good job of reminding them, just how scary that coalition is and the priorities of that coalition is, I think these suburban Republican women most likely sit out this election cycle.
So you think so? It's sort of suburban Republican women are the top in this large group.
Yeah. And I would also say this, you talk to numerous people. I've heard numerous conversations. I had a conversation with Frank Luntz in the past, and a Democratic pollster. I'm sure he doesn't want me to say their name, but he'd always said, listen, if President Trump is successful in peeling off 5% of the Democratic white vote in 2020, we're talking about a winning coalition for the next 20 years, irrespective of the Democratic minority growth vote. So I think the Black Lives Matter movement came at a time where Trump was looking for that, and I think if we're successful, especially if you look at the policies that the Democrats are pushing that are solely geared towards ethnic politics and racial politics, you're going to see a constituency that says that they're clearly not a part of that anymore. And if, like I said, if we can increase that number by 5%, and I think we're halfway there, we'll probably get there faster now. We'll probably see a winning coalition. This realignment that Karl Rove talked about in the early 2000s, I think we'll see that realignment take place.
Well, Bryan Lanza, I think we've taken up enough of your time out at Happy Hour. I always appreciate hearing what you have to say. I've learned so much, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and share your thoughts. And I have always trusted your instincts on politics, so I think that it's interesting to hear things from you that I'm maybe not hearing elsewhere. Some things I am hearing elsewhere. Try to weigh all that, and I think that's obviously the best way to figure out where things are going to go. So
Great.
Thank you.
It was fun. I enjoyed it, and hopefully everybody found it as entertaining. At least, I'm 4 drinks in, so I apologize to my Republican brethren for being a little bit more honest than I should have been.
No, that's great, and we always look for honesty. So we'll pull you in, and hopefully after pandemic, maybe I'll get to actually see you in person. So
that'll be great. You've got to come meet my kid.
I would love that. Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for joining, and take care.
All right, take care, everybody. Thank you.